The call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. Marcus heard the front door open before he heard anything else. Then came the sound of heels on marble, quick, purposeful, not the slow, tired shuffle of a woman coming home from a long day. These were the footsteps of a woman going somewhere. He stayed still in the dark of their bedroom, listening as those heels moved through the living room, paused, then changed direction toward the kitchen. He heard the fridge open, a glass, the pour of something cold, and then silence. He had been lying in that bed for 2 hours, waiting, testing himself really, seeing how long he could hold the secret before it swallowed him whole. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus Adami had made a decision that would either save his marriage or destroy it forever. He had decided to disappear not physically but financially. He had built a real estate empire worth over $12 million across Lagos, Abuja, and London. He had 3 companies, 11 properties, and a name that opened doors in rooms most people never entered. He wore his success like a second skin, comfortable and unannounced. He did not need to announce it. The driver, the watch, the house in Lekki Phase 1, everything announced it for him. He had also built a wife. Her name was Sola. He had met her 11 years ago when she was 23 years old, wearing a second-hand blazer at a business conference in Victoria Island, Lagos. She had no money, no connections, no family name that meant anything in those circles. What she had was presence, sharp eyes, a voice that did not shake when she spoke to men twice her age, and a kind of hunger that Marcus recognized immediately, because he had once carried that same hunger in his own chest during lean years that nobody talked about anymore. He saw himself in her, the version of himself that existed before the money arrived. He saw potential so clearly it was almost like reading a map of a country he had already visited. So he invested. He paid for her MBA at Lagos Business School. He introduced her to his network, walking her into rooms and making the introductions that take most people a decade to earn. He gave her seed capital for her first boutique, which failed after 8 months. Then her second business, a fashion consulting firm, which barely survived a year before the client base dried up. He covered the losses both times without complaint, without documentation, without ever once sitting across from her with a spreadsheet of what she owed him. Then he funded her third venture, a luxury skincare brand she named Adura, meaning prayer in Yoruba, because she said building it had felt like an act of faith. That one finally took off. The formulations were extraordinary, the branding was impeccable, and the distribution network that Marcus had quietly helped establish through his own contacts gave Adura a foothold that most new beauty brands spend years trying to find. It sold across West Africa, had recently landed a distribution deal in the UK, and was the subject of a feature in an international business magazine that described Sola as one of the most formidable women in African beauty. She wore the success like armor. She had earned it, Marcus never disputed that. Adura's growth beyond the initial funding was her own doing. The product was real. Her vision was real. Her work ethic was extraordinary and he respected it completely. But everyone who knew Sola also knew that Marcus Adami had built the floor she stood on, and Marcus had never once held it over her head. Not once in 11 years had he reminded her of where she started, what he had covered, what he had made possible. That was not the kind of man he was. Until now, when he needed to know if the foundation had become her own, or if she had only ever been standing on him. It started with a rumor. One of his oldest friends, Biodun, had called him on a Friday afternoon with the kind of careful, measured voice that people use when they are about to deliver news they desperately wish they did not have. "Marcus, I don't know how to say this to you." "Then say it fast," Marcus said. He was in his car about to pull out of the office complex. He turned the engine off. "I saw Sola last Thursday at Ember in Lekki. She was with Tade Coker." Marcus went still. Tade Coker was a venture capitalist, mid-30s, recently divorced, well-dressed in the way that men with new money dress, which is to say too deliberately. He had been trying to fund Adura for 6 months. He had approached Sola twice at industry events and once through a formal email to her office. Each time, Sola had told Marcus she had turned him down because his terms were too aggressive, and his interest in Adura felt personal rather than purely professional. They were just having dinner, Biodun. Sola meets clients for dinner. Marcus. Biodun paused long enough that Marcus could hear him choosing his words carefully. He had his hand on her back when they left, not the walking out of a business meeting kind of hand, the other kind. Marcus sat in that car for 45 minutes after the call ended without moving a single inch. The engine was off. The street outside was loud with evening traffic, generators humming, someone selling gala at the gate, the whole ordinary symphony of Lagos at dusk. He heard none of it. He was inside his own head, replaying every conversation from the past 3 months with the new lens that Biodun had just handed him. The late nights she explained as inventory issues and production delays. The weekend in Abuja, she said, was a women in business retreat. The one she came back from quieter than she had left. The new perfume that had appeared on her dressing table without explanation, floral and expensive, nothing like her usual scent. The way she had started to sleep on her side of the bed, as if there was a wall between them that neither of them had built, but both of them were somehow maintaining. The conversations that used to run long into the night and now ended at the surface of things. He had noticed all of it. He had told himself it was the pressure of Adura's UK expansion. He had told himself a lot of things. He did not confront her. He was too strategic for that and too afraid. Afraid of what a direct accusation would do to 11 years if he was wrong. Afraid of what the truth would do if he was right. So instead, he decided to create a situation that would reveal the truth without a single accusation. He would fake a financial collapse. He would manufacture a complete dismantling of everything he had built. He would tell her he had lost it all. And then he would watch very carefully and see exactly what kind of woman his wife became when the money was gone. He choreographed it with the precision he applied to everything. He spoke to his lawyer, his accountant, and his most trusted business partner, swearing each of them to absolute secrecy. He transferred assets into holding structures that Sola would not be able to trace. He stopped driving his Range Rover and started taking Uber, telling Sola the car was at the mechanics for a persistent electrical fault. He let the house staff go one by one across 2 weeks, telling Sola he was restructuring costs and it was temporary. The cook went first, then the second driver, then the cleaner who came 3 times a week. He sold his watch collection, or appeared to. He moved every watch into his office safe and told Sola the collection had been liquidated to cover a cash flow problem. He canceled their standing reservations at every restaurant they frequented. He stopped topping up the joint account. He watched her face each time he delivered another piece of the manufactured collapse. He memorized every flicker, every micro-expression, every adjustment in her posture and her voice. He was looking for the woman who would hold him in the dark and say it did not matter. He was terrified he would not find her. The first real test came 10 days into the performance, when Sola asked him about their London property. A 2-bedroom apartment in Canary Wharf that they had bought 3 years earlier as both an investment and a base, whenever they traveled to the UK for a Jura business. "I had to liquidate it," he told her. He kept his voice flat, depleted, not dramatic, the genuine exhaustion of a man who had been carrying bad news and had finally set it down. The banks were calling in loans I had guaranteed personally. The Abuja development ran into regulatory trouble 6 months ago, and the domino effect has been worse than I anticipated. I had no choice. She looked at him across the dining table, a long look. She was searching his face, he could see that, but he could not tell what she was searching for. "Marcus, how bad is it really?" "Bad enough that I'm not sleeping," he said. She nodded, slowly, deliberately. That was all. She nodded, picked up her fork, and continued eating. Then she stood up, took her plate to the kitchen, rinsed it, and went to her home office. He sat at the table alone and waited. He waited for her to come back, for her arms around his shoulders, for the voice she used when she was being tender. He waited for any of it. She did not come back that night. He heard her on a call in her office, professional, clipped, something about Q3 projections and shelf placement in Selfridges. He went to bed alone. The second test came 5 days later. He sat her down and told her he needed to borrow 50,000 naira from her personal account to cover a temporary gap, while a deal with a foreign investor cleared, just a bridge, Just a week. Just enough to keep the operational accounts from showing red to the bank. She went quiet for a moment. He watched her calculate something behind her eyes. Then she picked up her phone and made a transfer. 20,000 naira arrived in his account notification. Not 50, 20. He looked at his phone, he looked up at her. I said 50. That's all I could spare right now, she said evenly. I have my own expenses, Marcus. Ajura has payroll coming up. He stared at her. This was a woman whose entire business he had funded from nothing. This was a woman who had received over 40 million naira from him across 11 years startup capital, covering operational losses, personally paying 6 months of Ajura salaries during a crisis year when the first distribution partner pulled out without notice, funding 2 failed ventures before the third one worked. He had done all of it without keeping a single record, without ever asking for documentation, without once making her feel like a debtor. He had done it out of love and belief and the simple conviction that she was worth it. And she had transferred him 20,000 naira and explained that she had her own expenses. He excused himself, walked to the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub and breathed through the thing that was happening in his chest. Then came the night he heard the heels. He had been gone 3 days by then. He told Sola he needed to stay at his cousin Cola's place while he dealt with a property dispute that required him to be on the mainland early each morning. He had actually checked into a serviced apartment in Onaru, ordered room service each night, and sat with the silence of what he was doing and what it was costing him. His driver, Emmanuel, who had been with him for 8 years and whose loyalty was the kind that does not need to be asked for or rewarded, it simply exists, had been quietly relaying information. 2 nights earlier, Emmanuel had texted him 3 words, male visitor, 8 p.m. Then 40 minutes later, takeout delivery, 2 portions. Then at 11:23 p.m., he's leaving now. Marcus had read those messages sitting on the edge of the apartment bed and had felt something shift in his body, not explosion, not rage. Something colder and more final than either of those things. He made himself breathe. He made himself wait 1 more day. On the 3rd night, he came home unannounced. She did not hear him come in. He had a key and long practice at moving through that house in silence because he was often home late and she was often already asleep, and he had learned years ago how to pass through rooms without disturbing them. He moved through the living room, registered everything. The dining table had 2 placemats that had been used and pushed back but not put away. The kitchen counter held a half-empty bottle of Chateau Margaux, a 2015 from his personal cellar, a vintage he had been saving for a specific occasion that he had never gotten around to nomming. There were 2 wine glasses in the drying rack beside the sink. Both had been washed, carefully. He stood at the kitchen counter for a long moment, looking at those 2 washed glasses with the attention of a man reading the clearest sentence he has ever read. His wine, his glasses, his house. He walked into the bedroom. The bathroom light was on and the door was slightly open, and he could hear Sola at the sink. He sat down on the bed in the dark and waited. When she came out and saw him, she made a sound, a sharp intake of breath, her hand going to her chest. Marcus, you scared me half to death. I thought you were coming back tomorrow morning. I wrapped up early, he said. His voice was very even. Who was here tonight? She did not miss a beat. He noted that. Sandra came by. She's been going through something difficult with her husband and she needed someone to talk to. We had dinner and some wine. Sandra, he said. Yes, you know how she gets when she's overwhelmed. She just needed a friend. He looked at the robe she was wearing. The evening makeup still sitting perfectly on her face, not day old, not hastily applied. This was makeup that had been put on for company hours ago and had held. He looked at the robe again. Did Sandra bring the 2015 Chateau Margaux from the cellar? A pause, shorter than a second, but he had been married to her for 8 years and he knew exactly what her pauses sounded like when they were clean. This one was not clean. She brought wine, yes. I thought it was a nice evening for it. My wine, though, he said quietly. The wine I keep for occasions. Marcus, why are you interrogating me? I've been here alone for 3 days while you've been dealing with everything, and you come home and immediately start. I'm not interrogating you, he said. I'm going to bed, I'm tired. He let it go. For that night he let it go. But the following morning, while Sola was in the shower, he stood in front of his wine cellar and counted the bottles. One bottle of Chateau Margaux 2015 was missing. He had exactly 12. Now he had 11. He stood there and breathed, and then he closed the cellar door and went to make coffee. 2 days after that, Emmanuel followed Sola as she left the house mid-morning on a day she had told Marcus she had a shoot for an Adura campaign. She drove to a co-working space in Icoi. She met Tade Coker in the lobby. Emmanuel confirmed the identification from previous photos Marcus had sent him. They went upstairs together and stayed for 2 hours and 14 minutes. Emmanuel got a photograph, not of anything intimate, nothing that would stand as proof of the thing Marcus feared most. Just the two of them in the lobby, heads turned toward each other, her laughing at something Tade had said. A laugh so completely unguarded that Marcus almost did not recognize it when he saw the image. He had not seen her laugh like that in so long he could not pinpoint the last time. That full, head-tilted, completely surrendered laugh that used to be his exclusively. The laugh she gave when she was not performing anything for anyone, when she was just present and delighted and fully herself. He was looking at a photograph of his wife giving someone else the laugh that used to live in their kitchen on Sunday mornings. He held the phone for a long time. Then he set it face down on his desk and called his accountant. "Start phase 2, he said. Phase 2 meant the collapse got louder. He came home the following evening looking genuinely hollowed out. He had not slept well in days, which was true, so the appearance required no performance. He sat Sola down at the kitchen table and told her that his London holding company was under investigation by creditors following a fraudulent filing by his business partner, that the Abuja development had been seized pending a court order, that they might have to consider selling the Lekki house within the next 3 months to satisfy personal guarantee obligations. He watched her face as he said it. She was still, the way things get still before they either break or hold. "Marcus," she said finally, her voice was careful, "have you spoken to anyone about restructuring, a financial advisor who specializes in this?" "I have my accountant." "That's not what I mean. I mean someone who handles distressed assets specifically. I can ask around in my network." He looked at her. He waited. She was on her phone within 30 seconds, scrolling through contacts, not looking at him, not putting the phone down to take his hand, scrolling through contacts to find him a financial advisor for the collapse that she believed was real and had not once, in the 30 seconds since he told her, moved to close the distance between them. "Sola," he said. Still scrolling. "Can you put the phone down for a moment?" She looked up. Her expression was practical, efficient, the expression of a woman managing a problem. "Marcus, I'm trying to help." "I know," he said. "I know you are." He stood up and went outside to the garden and stood among the plants she had put there over years, plants she loved and tended and named, ridiculous names. She gave all of them ridiculous names, and he had always found it charming. And he stood there until he felt like he could walk back inside without his face giving him away. 3 days after that, Sola sat him down. He could tell she had rehearsed it. She was too composed, too arranged. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her, and her face had the particular stillness of someone who has already decided something difficult and has moved past the grief of the decision into the logistics of executing it. "Marcus," she began, "I have been thinking deeply about us, about where we are as a couple and where I am as a person." "Okay," he said carefully. "This is hard for me to say, and I want you to hear it without immediately defending yourself. I'm listening. I don't think I can continue in this situation. The financial uncertainty, I understand it is not your fault, and I'm not leaving because money is tight. But I need you to understand that I have built something real. I have built Adura into something that matters, and I have investors now, serious, credible investors who are watching, and I cannot afford for my personal circumstances to undermine the perception of my business. People talk. Business is perception as much as product. And if word gets around that my household is in financial distress. My household, he said quietly. She paused. Our household. But your business is separate. Marcus. Adura is separate. The business I funded. The brand I helped you build from nothing. That is separate from our household, which I also funded. But when things get difficult, Adura gets the protection and the household gets abandoned. She exhaled. I'm not trying to fight about this. What are you trying to do, Sola? Say it plainly. She met his eyes. I need to stay at the Eco-Atlantic apartment for a while, just to give us both some space to think and for me to protect what I've built. The apartment in Eco-Atlantic. The one he had bought outright for 450 million naira. The one she had asked him to register in her name because she said it made more sense for tax purposes related to Adura. The one that was now, in fact, legally hers. The apartment I bought, he said. Marcus, I'm not claiming assets right now. You're leaving to the apartment I bought to protect the business I funded because things are difficult for me. He looked at her with complete steadiness. Who is Tade Coker to you? The silence that followed that question was different from all the other silences in that room. It was the silence of a word landing exactly where it was aimed. What? She said. You heard me. I'm asking you directly. Who is Tade Coker to you, Sola? She stood up. Her composure cracked just slightly around the edges. I think this conversation needs to end here for tonight. Sit down. It was the flatness. He never raised his voice and he never had to. The absolute, immovable certainty underneath the words was what moved people. She sat back down. I know about the dinners. I know about Ember in Lekki. I know about the night he came to this house when I was gone. I know about my wine. I know about the co-working space in Ikoyi. He paused. Let each item settle into its own weight. I know about the photograph. She went pale. Not theatrical, genuinely pale, the blood running somewhere else entirely. You had me followed. Not a question. A statement that was also a defense, the first refuge available to someone who has just been caught. I had questions, I found answers. You had me followed like a suspect, like a criminal in my own home. Like a wife, he said evenly. I had you followed like a wife whose husband was trying to understand what was happening to 11 years of his life. I'm not going to apologize for needing to know the truth. So everything you've been doing, the financial collapse, the lost properties, the borrowed money, you were testing me. All of it. He said nothing. Oh my God. She put her hand over her mouth, then she dropped it. All of it. None of it was real. I needed to know who you would be, he said. When the money was gone, when my name stopped opening doors, when there was nothing left to stand on except the two of us, I needed to know if the two of us was enough for you, and now I know. She stared at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in her face, the guilt reorganizing itself into something harder, and in its own way just as legitimate and just as real. You lied to me for weeks, she said. Her voice was shaking. You manufactured a crisis inside our marriage, and you watched me fail your test without telling me I was being tested. You had me followed, and you sat at this table and deceived me deliberately, night after night. And you are sitting there with that look on your face like you are the only one who has been wronged here. He was quiet. How is that love, Marcus? Tell me, what kind of love looks like what you just described? He sat with that for a long time. It was a fair question. It was, in fact, the question he had been avoiding for weeks because it had no clean answer. It isn't love, he said finally. What I did was fear. I was afraid to ask you directly because I was more afraid of the answer than of not knowing. So I built a trap and I told myself it was a test. Those are not the same thing. I knew it wasn't the same thing and I did it anyway. He looked at her directly. But you walked into it, Sola. I didn't put his hand on your back at Ember. I didn't invite him to our house. I didn't open my wine cellar for him. Those were your choices. She sat back down. The fight had left her, replaced by something heavy and exhausted and true. They looked at each other across the table in the house they had shared for 8 years, two people sitting in a wreckage that both of them had made in different ways and for different reasons. What do you want to happen? She asked. I want the truth, he said. The real version, not the version that protects you. A long silence. The kind of silence that is not empty but full of everything that needs to be said being arranged into the right order for the first time. Aid makes me feel like a choice, she started slowly. Like someone who saw something valuable and decided he wanted it, not because he created it, not because he invested in it, not because his money is in it, but because it exists and it is excellent and he decided he wanted to be near it. She looked at her hands. With you, I have always felt like your greatest achievement, your best investment, your proof of concept. You are generous, Marcus. Genuinely and extraordinarily generous. But your generosity has always had a shape to it. I always knew the shape. He felt that move through him like something cold and precise. I never asked you to pay it back. You didn't have to ask. I always knew the debt was there. I could feel the weight of it in every room of this house and in every corner of my business. She finally met his eyes. When I thought you had lost everything, I panicked. Not because I stopped loving you, but because I looked at my life, really looked at it, and I could not identify which parts were mine. I could not find the line between what I had built and what you had made possible, and the impossibility of finding that line terrified me. So you ran toward a man who didn't build you. I ran toward someone who had no receipts, she said quietly. Someone who couldn't take anything from me because he had never given me anything. I ran toward what felt in that moment like freedom. Marcus leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then he looked at her. Has it gone beyond dinners and Ikoi? She hesitated. Tell me, Sola, all of it. No, she said. It hasn't, but I wanted it to. I wanted to understand what it would feel like to step outside of everything you built and just exist for a moment as only myself, as nothing more and nothing less than who I am. He nodded slowly, the nod of a man absorbing something he would be processing for a long time, maybe always. I need you to leave, he said. Marcus. Not permanently, tonight. I need tonight to think without you in the house. She gathered herself slowly. At the door, she paused without turning around. The 20,000 naira, she said quietly. I know what it looked like. I want you to know that was genuinely all that was in that account that day. The rest was locked in Ajura's operating float and I could not touch it without risking payroll. I was not withholding from you deliberately. A pause. But I know that is not the only thing you are hurt about. She left. Marcus sat alone in the house for a very long time. He sat until the generators outside wound down one by one, and the street went quiet, and the only sound was the ceiling fan and his own breathing. Then he picked up his phone and called his lawyer. Call everything off, he said. Restore all structures to their original state. The accounts, the assets, all of it. The game is over. And the marriage, his lawyer asked carefully. Marcus looked around the living room. The two washed wine glasses, long dried in the rack, the placemat still on the table. Her plants in the corner, the ones she had given their ridiculous names to, she had named one Douglas. She had named another one after a character in a book he could not remember. The photograph on the shelf of the two of them in Santorini, 5 years earlier, both of them laughing at something the photographer had said, leaning into each other like people who have no idea what is coming. I don't know yet, he said. The following weeks did not resolve into a clean story. That is the thing nobody tells you about revelations. They do not close wounds. They open ones that have been sealed too long without proper treatment. Wounds that have been doing their quiet damage underneath the surface long before anyone noticed. Marcus sat with everything he now knew, the way you sit with a chronic pain you have been managing so long that you forgot it was not normal until someone finally named it. Biodun called him one afternoon and Marcus told him the whole story, not looking for advice, just needing to hear it outside of his own head. Biodun was quiet through all of it. When Marcus finished, Biodun was quiet for another moment, and then he said the one thing Marcus could not shake afterward. Marcus, you built her and you loved her. I believe both of those things completely. But did you ever once ask her what she wanted to build for herself, separate from you? Did you ever give her room to fail on her own terms, or did you always come in before the failure could fully land and do what it needed to do? Marcus did not have an answer. He called Sola 2 weeks later. They met at a restaurant in Victoria Island that neither of them had history in clean ground, no shared memories attached to the walls. She came without the new perfume. She was wearing a simple wrap dress, nothing armored about her appearance. He noticed immediately. "I ended it with Tade," she said before he had even picked up the menu. "All of it. The conversations, the investment discussions, everything. I told him the situation was inappropriate and that a professional relationship could not continue in its current form." "Why?" Marcus asked. She looked at him steadily. "Because whatever is broken between us belongs to us. Importing a solution from outside does not fix what is broken inside. It only adds more damage to the original damage." She paused. "And because I looked clearly at what Tade actually wants, and I realized he does not want me. He wants the thing you helped me become. He is not interested in Sola, who failed twice before she succeeded. He wants the Ajura founder, the UK distribution deal, the brand equity. He wants what you built, and I am not interested in being someone's acquisition." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Outside the restaurant, Lagos was doing what Lagos always does, moving, loud, relentless, insisting on itself. "You said you felt like my project." "Yes." "I need to understand that better. When did it start feeling that way?" She thought about it genuinely. He could see her being honest with herself in real time, not performing the answer but actually finding it. "Not at the beginning," she said. "At the beginning it felt like being believed in, which was everything, Marcus. You have to understand that. Having someone see potential in you before you can see it yourself, that is an extraordinary and rare gift." She looked down at the tablecloth. "But over time, as Ajura grew and the success became real, I started to wonder. I started to ask myself whether I had earned it or whether it had been given to me, and I could not find a clean answer, because the truth is both. Both are true simultaneously, and I did not know how to sit with both without one of them undoing the other." "You earned it," he said simply. "You cannot give me that absolution, Marcus. That is mine to find. I appreciate it, but that is mine to find." He nodded. She was right. "I should have asked you," he said. "Instead of watching you in the dark, waiting for you to fail or pass, I should have sat across from you at a table like this one and asked you what you needed, what was frightening you, what the distance between us meant to you. That would have been the honest thing to do. What I did instead was fear dressed up as strategy." "Yes," she said, "it was." "And what you did was also fear," he said, "dressed up as independence." She held his gaze without looking away. "Yes," she said quietly, "it was." They sat with the honesty of that for a while. Two people in their late 30s, across a dinner table, finally saying the things that the previous years had needed them to say, and that neither of them had been brave enough to say before things got to where they got. "I don't know if I can trust you the same way again," he said. "I know. And I know you don't fully trust me either, not after the test, not after what I put you through. No, not fully. So where does that leave us?" She reached across the table and touched the back of his hand, not clasping it, just touching it lightly, the gesture of someone making contact rather than making a claim. "It leaves us honest, which is more than we were before any of this happened. Maybe that is where we start, not from trust, because trust will take time to rebuild on both sides, but from honesty, from the agreement to say the real thing instead of the safe thing." Marcus turned his hand over slowly and held hers. Outside, Lagos insisted on itself. Inside, two people sat with the full weight of the wreckage and the possibility of what came next, both equally real, equally uncertain, equally theirs. "I want to try," he said. "So do I. But differently." "Yes," she said, "differently." It was not the reconciliation you see in films. There was no music underneath it. There were no tears of relief or promises that tied everything back into a neat and certain shape. There was just two people who loved each other with the full knowledge of each other's capacity for damage, deciding to stay in the room anyway. That is a different kind of courage than the movies usually show, quieter, and in many ways harder. Marcus went home that night and stood in front of the wine cellar. He looked at the 11 remaining bottles of Chateau Margaux. Then he took one out, opened it, poured himself a glass, and sat at the kitchen table alone and drank it slowly, not out of grief, not out of anger, as a kind of ceremony for the ending of one thing and the beginning of another. The old version of this marriage was finished. Whatever came next would need to be built from scratch, and this time, built together, with both people at the table when the plans were drawn. Sola stood outside the Adura office in Lagos the following morning and looked up at the sign with her brand's name in gold letters against a cream background. She had always looked at that sign as evidence of what Marcus had made possible. On this morning, for the first time, she allowed herself to see it differently. She had formulated the products. She had designed the brand language. She had made the decisions that turned a failing skincare line into something that sat on shelves in London. Both things were true simultaneously. Marcus had built her foundation, and she had built the house that stood on it. She had been so afraid that acknowledging his contribution would erase her own that she had been refusing to acknowledge either one clearly. That morning, she let both truths stand. She went inside and got to work. That evening, she came home to the Lecky house. Marcus was already there. The placemats from the night she could not explain were still on the table. She picked them up and put them away. Then she went to the kitchen and started cooking. He walked in while she was at the stove, and without a word he went to the drawer and pulled out 2 sets of cutlery and set the table. They ate. They talked carefully at first, then less carefully. They talked about Adura's Q4 projections and a property in Abuja he was genuinely considering, and the leaking tap in the bathroom that had been leaking for 3 months, and that neither of them had gotten around to fixing. Small things. Real things. The ordinary substance of a shared life that they had been stepping over for months to avoid the larger conversation that had finally, at enormous cost, been had. After dinner, he washed the dishes. She dried. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of water and the distant noise of the neighborhood settling into night. "I owe you an apology," he said, hands in the soapy water. "You do," she agreed, holding out her hand for a plate. "I'm sorry for the test, for the fear behind it. For 3 weeks of deliberate lying." She dried the plate slowly. "I'm sorry too, for Tade, for the distance I let grow between us without ever naming what it was, for the 20,000 naira. She glanced at him sideways. "That one still embarrasses me." "It should," he said, but there was something in his voice that was not anger anymore. She bumped her shoulder lightly against his. He looked at her. She was not smiling exactly, but she was present, fully present, no walls, no armor, no new perfume. Just Sola, the woman from the second-hand blazer, standing in their kitchen, drying a plate. He went back to the dishes. They did not know if they would fully recover from this. Honest people rarely make promises about that because honest people understand that recovery is a practice, not an event. But they were in the kitchen. They were talking. They were doing the small and necessary work of 2 people who had decided, with full knowledge of everything, to try. Sometimes that is where love lives, not in the grand declarations, not in the tests passed or the revelations survived, in the ordinary, daily decision to stay in the room and do the work. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that is enough. If this story moved something in you, if there was a line that hit too close, a conversation you recognized, a moment that made you pause, drop it in the comments. Tell us exactly what you felt. Tell us where it landed. We read every single comment on this channel, and your responses shape the stories we choose to tell next. If you are new here, this channel exists for the stories that live in the space between what people say and what they actually mean, between what people build and what it costs them to build it. Subscribe right now so you never miss a story. Hit the like button if this one was worth your time tonight. Share it with one person who needs to hear